Welcome to today's Explainer. We're looking at a pretty fascinating botanical puzzle today, pulled right from some incredible gardening notes on the Mexican mint, or if you want to get fancy with the botanical name, plectranthus-amboinicus. Whether you're an experienced green thumb with a whole jungle at home, or you're just a highly focused learner trying to keep that one single desk plant alive, managing how this thing grows is an absolute masterclass in biology. So let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. If you've ever had a houseplant that suddenly decided it wanted to literally eat your entire living room, you know the exact frustration we're dealing with today. You start out with this neat, compact little plant, right? And then bam, within a few months, it's stretching all the way across your table, looking unruly and completely chaotic. The core question the author of our source material, Ang, is wrestling with here is, how do you actually tame a sprawling Mexican mint? It's a classic gardening dilemma for sure, and fixing it requires a bit of tactical strategy and a solid grasp of the plant's inherent biology. First things first, we've got to get a baseline understanding of what this plant is actually trying to do. You see, the Mexican mint has this very distinct, naturally trailing habit. And what's super important to note here is that it really doesn't matter if you're growing the original green variety or that striking variegated type. They both share this exact same genetic predisposition. The plant naturally wants to stretch out. It branches out, it spreads, and it acts very much like a vine. It's not trying to be difficult, and it's definitely not trying to ruin your interior design. It's simply following its own biological programming. Once you realize that the sprawl isn't an accident, but a core feature of the plant itself, you can start making much smarter decisions about how to handle it. So let's break down the physical mechanics of why this happens. We're looking at the actual anatomy of the sprawl, and honestly, it's basically a physics equation. First, you've got the thick, heavy stems of the Mexican mint. Second, you combine that with its noticeably large leaves. And third, you introduce the undisputed, undefeated heavyweight champion of the universe into the mix, gravity. When the plant hits a certain length, this fascinating and, highly frustrating event happens. The stems just get incredibly heavy because of all the mass from those large leaves and moisture-retaining structures. Eventually, they just surrender to gravity. The weight literally becomes too much for the stem to support vertically. And the consequence of that physics problem? It's what our source aptly describes as the upward struggle. Because the sheer weight has caused those stems to bend and cascade outward, your plant is now growing sideways, or even awkwardly downwards. But here's the kicker. The growing tips of the plant still desperately want to reach up for the light. So they start curving and struggling to grow upward from this bent, totally compromised position. The result? Well, as our source points out, it creates foliage that is far less aesthetically appealing. It looks messy, disorganized, and it completely loses that nice, neat shape you originally wanted. But here is where you come in. As a plant owner, you have all the agency here. You're basically presented with a choice between two distinct paths to mitigate this issue. Path 1 is all about maintaining control, forcing the plant to remain compact and bushy through active management. Path 2, on the flip side, is about adaptation. It's transforming that unruly sprawl into a graceful cascade by altering the environment. These two paths represent completely different philosophies of indoor gardening. Understanding the mechanics of both really empowers you to choose your own botanical aesthetic. So let's see how Path 1 actually works. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the hidden signs of pruning. It's all about growth hormones. Tucked inside the very tip of the Mexican mint plant is a chemical driver that explicitly forces vertical growth. As long as that tip is intact, the plant is sending all its energy straight out. But the second you trim that tip, you literally remove that specific growth hormone. By doing this, you instantly activate the plant's lateral side buds. Instead of growing longer, the plant is suddenly forced to redirect its energy sideways, making the entire structure significantly thicker and bushier. It's this remarkable biological override that you control entirely with just a pair of scissors. How cool is that? So, how do we practically apply this science? Well, here are the exact step-by-step instructions for regular pruning and harvesting to get that dense bushiness. First, you routinely cut those long, sprawling stems right back. Second, you step back and allow those newly awakened side buds to activate. That's what fills out the core of the plant. But wait, the process doesn't end there. You've now got a bunch of cuttings. Our source author recommends letting these cuttings mature until their roots are really well established. Then, for step 3, you transplant these rooted cuttings into a new pot. Now, crucially, you want to use a high-drainage potting mix. In fact, the author specifically mentions using a mix harvested from the wild, ensuring the soil doesn't hold excess moisture. It's absolutely perfect for these thick-stemmed beauties. But hey, what if you just don't want to constantly prune, harvest, and propagate? Good news? There is another way, leaning into the stretch. Instead of fighting the plant's inherent biological desire to branch out and spread like a vine, you can actively accommodate it. You just accept that gravity is going to pull those heavy leaves and thick stems downward, and you completely reframe the problem as an opportunity. It's a fantastic reminder that sometimes working in tandem with natural tendencies rather than pushing against them yields a ridiculously beautiful result. Plus, it usually requires way less active maintenance on your end. To execute this second path, you don't even change the plant. You simply change the plant's environment. You grow it as a cascading plant. By popping that Mexican mint into a hanging basket, those long, heavy stems are no longer awkwardly sprawling across a flat table, and they aren't struggling upward from a bent position anymore. Instead, they are allowed to spill over gracefully. That exact same weight that was causing a frustrating aesthetic issue in a standard flat pot now creates this stunning, trailing waterfall of thick green foliage. You basically embrace the plant's vine-like tendencies and let it thrive in the form it naturally wants to take anyway. So we've got two excellent, perfectly viable options laid out in front of us. But what did the gardener who originally documented this specific dilemma actually decide to do? Well, the verdict from the author, Ang, is clear. Quote, "For the time being, I'm opting for the first approach." From their notes on gardening, it's very clear they currently prefer the hands-on control of regular pruning and harvesting. They want to actively keep their Mexican mint compact and bushy, utilizing those cut stems to propagate entirely new pots in that high-drainage wild soil mix. And it's a wonderful testament to the fact that there is no single right way to garden. It all comes down to the amount of active time you want to invest and the specific structured look you want to cultivate in your own space. Which brings us to the absolute most important part of this explainer, how you apply this. I want to leave you with this provocative question to ponder. When you're faced with a sprawling, unruly Mexican mint, or really any challenge where nature seems to have its own competing agenda, will you fight your plant's nature to meticulously shape it, or will you change its environment and just let it cascade? The fascinating science of growth hormones and lateral buds gives you the power to prune and control, while the simple physics of hanging baskets allows you to gracefully surrender to gravity. The choice is entirely yours to apply on your own windowsill. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep structurally analyzing the world around you, and I absolutely can't wait to guide you through our next explainer.